Hey, what's up you guys? SuperRaeDizzle here. Welcome back to my channel. And in today's video, we're going to be going over the do's and don'ts of portrait drawing. In this video, I'll be focusing on the don't techniques and demonstrate why they don't work. This won't be the kind of video where the only tip is to just draw better. So if you guys want to learn some simple portrait techniques, stay tuned and let's get this show on the road. And as always with all my videos, left side will be the don't and right side will be the do. Alright, cool, so let's just start. So first thing we're going to talk about is your outline. So common things to avoid are 1. Your outline is too harsh, and B. Incorrect proportions. So whenever you start portraits, you're going to want to start really light-handed. You're going to be doing a lot of erasing and redrawing and erasing and redrawing, especially when it comes to trying to map out the initial proportions. So for example, in this instance, as you can see, I'm using just like a regular, number 2 pencil, but I'm pressing really hard. So it's like a really dark outline from the start, which will cause problems later, because later it'll be really difficult to blend out that pigment once it's like really pressed in there. And it'll also be a lot harder to erase whenever you're trying to make lines look a little bit more natural. And of course, you don't want your official drawing to have a bunch of heavy pressed in marks all over the place. Well, you could. I don't know your life. And my tip for drawing proportions is to draw a map. Maps are really intricate and they're really specific, so it'll help you a lot with the ability to look at something and translate that onto paper. So, as you guys can see, I am getting in some proportions, but they're not correct. They're just kind of what I imagined them to be as opposed to what they actually are. And if you are a new artist, don't get discouraged. It is a lot to handle at first. But, as cheesy and silly as this sounds, just practice and keep at it, and you guys will be able to nail it in no time. Alright, cool. So now that we got the proportions down, I'm going to start working on the heavy outline that I was talking about. Now, it's great for illustration, cartooning, and things like that, but if you want to go for, a semi kind of realistic look, I wouldn't recommend heavy lines. So now on to the do side. So taking my H pencil, which is one of the lightest pencils in the pencil sets, which you don't have to use. You can use a regular 2B. I've done it tons of times. I'm just being extra in this video, and I'm using a really light pencil to start carving out the facial features and the proportions and just kind of get a feel for where I want everything to go. So it's been about 50 years later, and I think all of my proportions are in a place that I'm happy with, where they're all correct and everything looks good and clean and, anatomically correct. And just take like a little side note to see how light it is compared to the other one. So this leads us to our next don't section. And all of these involve shading. So the first one will be going too dark way too soon, and the second one will be too light with no depth. So we have both extremes here, too dark and too light. So the main areas to focus on are the eyes. People tend to go a little bit too light when it comes to the eyes. Next, you want to focus underneath the nose and underneath the lips. And the area that I see most often that is really heavy is the cheekbone area and also the forehead area. So it makes a lot of sense, right? The eyes are pure black, the eyeliner is pure black, and the eyebrows are pure black. So it makes sense to just fill them in pure black, right? Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case here. If you start off pure black right off the bat, you're not going to get your transition shades in. And so as you can see, it just goes from a harsh black to a pure white, which necessarily isn't a realistic quality. So let me throw in them chola eyebrows. And we can move on to the next example, which will be adding too light of shading. I know there's a fine line between dark under eye circles and a nice eyeshadow, but don't be afraid to just start adding in shadow around the eyes and give it some depth, and the nose and the nose bridge, It won't look necessarily dirty if you start off really light and then slowly, gradually build up your shadows. Do you guys remember in the last step when I was like, you don't want to press too hard because it will be kind of hard to erase? Well, this is the example. The time is nigh. I'm trying to erase that hard line where the lips are because now I don't want it there, now that I got the shadow placement, and it just won't erase. And it looks like she has permanent lip liner or something, I don't know. So just be careful not to press too hard. Now we're going to work on the cheekbones, which is one that I see often. You start off really hard because you want a harsh shadow, and again, it just, doesn't necessarily work because there's no transition shades. And it just gets to that point where you can't really erase it smooth or blend it smooth because it's just so heavy. So watch out for that. And now we can finally go back to the do side. The do side. Get back to the do side. I feel like usually when there's do's and don'ts video, they focus only on the do's. So this time I'm really trying to focus on the don'ts and, make it look, give it an even playing field. And this brings us to the next do, which will be start off light and building up your shadows and adding a bunch of transition shades so you can transition from the pure black to the pure white. So for this step, it takes me a really long time because I just add and add and add layer by layer. So it'll be in super mega hyper speed. So if you guys want to know more about how I go step by step on portrait drawing, I do have a video on it. I'll go in with a light wash all over the face just to create the transition shades, and then from there I will add in the areas that are going to be super dark. So like the eyeliner, eyebrows, and nose, but I don't put them in pure black yet. I just do like a dark gray. And I'll go over and over and do that same process of layering and layering until I get to pure black, basically. So basically what I do is start off very broad. So the first few layers will be like the whole entire face shadow. The next one will be a little bit more in detail, so like the nose and eyes and lip shadows. And then from there I'll get even more detailed and start doing like darker and darker and darker, more detail and more detail. So it's a pretty stark difference between the first one when I was like, bam, black shadow, bam, white highlight. This one, it's a little bit more calm. I can't believe we're already on the last don't. I feel like this video just like flew by. Anyway, our don'ts will be 1, not adding any details, 2, adding details that are just random lines and calling it good, and 3, a lack of depth with heavy shadow. So for the lack of detail on this, I'm not going to add any individual hairs on the eyebrow. However, I am going to add random lines to represent the eyelashes. And I'm going to do the same thing for the lips. And now we're going to move on to the last example, which if you guys remember was adding or not adding in heavy shadows. Now don't get me wrong, you can create some really nice depth when it comes to a 2B number 2 pencil. But I like to take it to the next level and use a charcoal pencil. So for this don't, I am not taking advantage of that depth that I could get with this specific pencil. Which brings us to our last do, and that is adding in that depth with a charcoal pencil, and this, people, is where the magic happens. And like I said, don't get me wrong, you can create some nice depth with regular pencils, but just adding in pure black just really makes everything pop. And of course, I'm going to be adding in some extra details like the eyelashes and individual eyebrow hairs and things like that. And for this piece, I was really inspired by like the whole 1960s heavy eyeliner, heavy contrast photo kind of look. I thought it'd be a really easy way to demonstrate highlights and darks and things like that and still keep it kind of realistic. And even simple to see the heavy contrasts and shadows and lights and everything for you beginners out there. So with that being said, all I'm going to do now is start adding in the hair for both of them. And that's it. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, here is the final color corrected version. And yeah, with that being said, I hope you guys learned a little something. And if you guys want to check out more of my art, you guys can find my Instagram where I post literally every single thing that I paint or draw. I love you guys, and I will see you next video.